All right. Well, welcome. Excited to have you both here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Great
Yeah.
to see you.
Well, we are going to be talking about events. Probably no surprise for folks that are in the wealth management community. I'm sure these faces are familiar. And specifically around why events, events with purpose, so on and so forth. So I'm going to pass it over to you two just to share a little bit about your background. How did you get into this space? And then we'll go from there. So, Angela, do you want to start us off?
I do. My background is decades of advisor marketing and implementation in the world of marketing, plan implementation, and event implementation. And I did that in-house for over a decade and then was consulting for another decade. Fast forward to the pandemic, Elyse and I met and we started colliding and comparing event planning. And
Mhm.
back in the day, strategy wasn't really a piece of the
Yep.
event planning implementation in the advisor world. And Elise's background was all event strategy. So when we met, it was, chocolate and peanut butter were better together because now we bring event strategy to the FinServe ecosystem.
Love it. And Elise, how about for you? Love to hear a little bit more.
So, yeah, I was not born and raised in the financial services market. My background is in the sports, entertainment, and higher education marketing world. Um, when I was in college and trying to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up, I had heard about this cool thing called sports marketing.
Mhm.
And I spent about 10 years in that promoting rodeos and concerts and worked for a Division I athletic conference where we put on basketball tournaments and everything was very strategic. You knew who your audience was, you knew how you were marketing to them. And when I kind of got out into the big wide world, I would go to these events and go like, yeah, I'm not the right person to be here. Like, what's the deal? So I started thinking about this whole idea of the event marketing strategy. And like Angela said, when she and I met, I was like, I know folks in financial services do a lot of events, but like, why do they do them?
Right, right.
Well, because like their coach told them to,
You're
or
supposed to check in the box. Yes.
exactly. And it just, so the conversation evolved into this, like this strategy and understanding why and understanding who you're doing the event for
Yep.
and talking, and we'll talk more about this, but like talking to them in the channels that they use.
Yep.
Um, and really, when we came together and created event advisors, it's being able to share Angela's experience in the wealth advisory space, my experience in strategic marketing, and really helping everybody in what we call the FinServe ecosystem have events that have purpose, that are actually have their own sets of goals and tied into their business strategy.
Mhm.
So they don't get a bad rap anymore. We love events. We hate that people like say they're expensive and they hate them.
I get it. I really appreciate the background that you bring. A lot of times we'll talk about, we're zeroed in on this financial services world, right? But there's so many other amazing things that are happening in the blogger community and, like you said, sports and other spaces out there to be able to take those best practices and pull them in. So tell us a little bit more. So you've met in like during COVID, and what was kind of the spark for where you are today? What is it different kind of, pre-COVID to post-COVID, and what led you to really form the entity that you have?
I'll jump in there, Lauren. So I was working in the space of marketing plan implementation and event planning implementation for mostly local advisors, wholesalers, and some broker dealers. When the pandemic hit, as we all know, all events shut down.
Yep.
So at that point, I started working with colleagues that I knew across the country and advisors they worked with to help them navigate the landscape and not come to a complete halt, but shift their event planning to virtual event planning.
Okay.
So I started working with advisors around the country to determine what virtual events made sense for their client base so they could stay connected to their clients during the pandemic. So
Hmm.
that included your virtual wine tastings, game night, craft night, trivia. You
Yes.
know, as we all know from back then, there were hundreds of different virtual
Mm-hmm.
options. And at the time that Elyse and I met, I was working in that world, trying to help
Right.
advisors navigate how to share the new message, how to execute a great virtual event.
Mhm.
And I was learning about strategic events because, as we talked a few minutes ago, strategy really didn't play a big part in the FinServe events. It was, of course, we always paid attention to who we wanted to invite, where we wanted to have it, but we didn't go one layer below that you do with strategic event planning. So
Mhm.
when Elyse and I were talking about event strategy, and I was trying to do these virtual events, and at the same time, as we progressed through the pandemic, advisors were asking, okay, we really like these virtual events because we're now reaching some of our best clients that aren't in our geographical area.
Yep.
But now that we're starting to open up, we'd like to do in-person events. How do we redo our marketing plans and our event calendars? This was a big reset in the FinServe community because
Mm.
for so long, we just kept rinsing and repeating. And when everything came to a halt, it was, wait, should we relook at this? And how do we relook at this? And how do we integrate these new event tactics and strategies? So fast forward, we joined forces and started working with advisors to create strategic events and strategic marketing plans where you're really looking at the business goals, looking at the event goals because they tie into each other, and then create the event based on those goals and the ideal attendee. So you look at where are they coming from, what is, or do they work, do they not work, and those little details so that the event speaks to them. How do
Uh-huh.
they like to receive their invitations? It's really about the ideal attendee, not about the host,
Yep.
the advisor, or whoever's planning the event. So that's how we started to work on these events. And then Event Advisors was born, and we work with advisors around the country, wholesalers, and broker dealers.
Right. I'd love to hear, you know, you get to put here at Out and About, we often like to talk about how we want to make sure that everything that goes out, like a social media post, for example, you can connect it to the bigger picture, the why. Like you're not just
Mhm.
doing to do, right? So I definitely resonate with a lot of what you're saying too. It's that you're doing this in a purposeful way and that it's aligned with a bigger picture objective. Could either of you or both sort of give some maybe like a kind of mini case study example or two that would help to kind of narrate for those that are listening, like a good example of a kind of strategic event? What does that look like? How does it differentiate itself from maybe just an event, right? To have an event like a happy hour or what have you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like a case study.
Okay. I think we can give you two. I mean, we could give you a whole bunch, but we'll give you two.
Yes,
The
please.
the first one is actually the very first partnership that Angela and I worked on. It was an advisory firm in Texas. And they conceded that they needed to do a virtual wine tasting event.
Hmm.
Um, and they had three of their advisors that were teaming up. And they're like, we know we need to do this thing, but we have no idea how to do it. So
Right, right,
Angela had the contact with the vineyards in Northern California. And again, the whole like shipping wine to people's homes
right.
and all that good stuff. But what we talked about and what I came in to say is, why are you doing this?
Hmm.
Well, we need to connect with our clients,
Hmm.
and then we talked about which clients they wanted to connect with,
Yep.
sort of almost made like an avatar of those people,
Hmm.
so that we could think about, literally we talked about like how many squares, how many Brady Bunch boxes do you want on the screen?
Yes.
Um, because do you want to be able to see everybody?
Yep.
Um, is this something that maybe is a multiple choice night, right? We're
Hmm.
doing three of these and people get to choose which night they do
Hmm.
because it was virtual and
Right,
you're
right.
giving them some flexibility. So it was conversation along those lines. One of the places that we also thrive and we know is a pain point for a lot of our clients is follow-up.
Yes.
And this
Post
particular,
event.
yes,
Yes.
post-event follow-up. And this particular client, we spent a lot of time talking about that because what we felt was you've got everybody in their squares
Yes.
and they're tasting wines and they're getting educated, and you talk about how you want to connect with them. We created a full follow-up strategy for them, to not only say thank you and all the things that we know we're supposed to do, but we talked about the wine. And we use the wine as what we call the positive emotional memory, and said, when you reach out to your attendees afterwards, don't ask them, did you like the wine? Yes or no.
Yes.
It's which was your favorite? And if you didn't have a favorite, what is your favorite wine? So you're able to capture some information that you can go ahead and they can go ahead and put in their database to use in the future for an anniversary, for with, those wow moments.
Yep.
Just kind of a nice little twist. The other side of that twist was one of the issues that the client had too was our advisors hate doing follow-up. Like the event's over, they don't want to do it. So we came up with what in the industry is called gamification. Again, will be stereotypical. It was an advisory firm that was mostly male in Texas. So we basically said, how about a scoreboard? And put it up. Some of these folks were still coming to the office, like put it up in the office and keep track of who's making calls. My initial response was, you could do like a Starbucks gift card for the person who like hits the marker the faster. And the advisor's like, our advisors like bourbon. I'm like,
all right,
bourbon?
sounds good. Yeah.
Bourbon. We like bourbon too. So really kind of leaning into that. And they were able to connect with these folks and continue conversations and get really good information that they've never really thought about when they would simply just say, y'all come and we'll have a little party and send them on their way.
Yeah.
And then
Angela, go ahead.
Sorry. Angela has a great example of another client who was struggling in a post-COVID manner. And she can go ahead and tell the story.
So we had a client who really wanted to reach their top A clients. But when we sat down with them, they couldn't pinpoint a geographical area where these top clients were. They had some were here in Southern California. They had some in Orange County. They had some in LA. They even had some in San Francisco.
Yep.
So to do an event, a large client appreciation event, and expect people to come from the different areas, it's not likely. So they had kind of put the stop there, going, we can't have one because we have clients in everywhere.
Just so common these days.
Very.
Exactly.
Very. And so we sat down and said, well, we need to have a different mindset because yes, you can have a client appreciation. It doesn't need to be like the advisor next door upstairs down the street. It doesn't have to be 100-person, summer party, whatever it might be. So we actually sat down with a map of the different areas and had them dot the cities and the areas that their top clients were in. And what we did is we created a model. We started with San Francisco because that really had the biggest cluster. And we looked at this map, physically looked at the map with the dots and considered traffic times and work schedules and came up with an event and a location that would work with everybody. And we looked at the preferences.
So figuring that out, my goodness. Okay.
So then what we did is we figured out where we wanted to have the event, but what type of event. So we brainstormed and talked through the characteristics of these households, of these clients. And you're going to think all we do is wine events, but this was a common interest. They liked fine wine. They liked great food. So we came up with a small, intimate wine pairing dinner
Mm-hmm.
up in Northern California. We had 10 people. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking large, we're talking very intimate because that's where this cluster was.
Right.
And everything from the personal invitation to the follow-up confirmation to when they walked in and were greeted and sat down and who was seated next to each other.
All
And
thought
it
through.
wasn't a sales pitch. There was no business discussed at all. It
Right.
was just coming together, deepening that relationship, creating the community within that with between the other
Yep.
clients. And we were told that the restaurant actually had to ask them to, they were shutting down. They had such a good time. They were there well past 11, and I think they started at 7. And it was just this great experience. And the sommelier had given them a gift to let them track what they liked about each wine, what they didn't like about
Mm-hmm.
the wine, helped kind of spur some ideas for maybe future travel. So they left with this whole package in this positive emotional memory that we touched on earlier that really created such a great experience,
Yep.
something they can talk about with their friends and with the advisory firm, for years to come. And it's just, again, it was a positive and a strong return on the moment. It was
Yeah.
a success.
What I love about that story is that through the narrative, you were able to identify the points of friction of like, well, who do I sit next to? Am I going to have an interesting dialogue? Like, was it easy to get to? All these kind of things that were thought through. And as you're reducing the friction, that helps to make it much more seamless for everyone. So just that's very much, it's easier said than done. And then Elise, I also appreciate just I think the level of personalization that you all are adding to those different events as well. And specifically in your story, you were like, okay, the follow-up is key, right? But that personal follow-up is key. But we have to motivate action. And we see this too. Like, you can have the best event, you can have the best whatever it is. But if you're not getting people there, and if you're not doing the follow-up, then it's going to fall flat. So it's really got to be this
Mhm.
collaborative effort. It's like putting together a CRM. You've got to have people that buy into it in order for it to be able to take off, just to kind of create maybe a familiar parallel example for those that haven't done events before. So
Absolutely.
tell us
Absolutely.
about, are there any other kind of trends that you're seeing post-COVID? Or webinars, still a thing and these virtual events? Are you seeing an upward trend and more of these kind of event examples, in-person event examples that you all describe? Kind of what are you seeing in today's day and age, if you will, post-COVID?
It's like a pendulum.
Mm-hmm.
And first there was the big swing one way, right? Like, we've got to do events and we've got to bring together as many people as safely as we can.
Yep.
And then it was like, ooh, I don't like that many people. They scare me. And then it would swing back to the other side. But what we're finding now is the trends are much more about value
Mm,
and versus the things that people are doing. And
yes.
we have this philosophy about, and Angela touched on this. It's when you're doing an event, it's not about measuring ROI.
Mm,
We believe it's measuring ROM, which is the return on the moment. You're
mm,
creating this moment, which is like a rock in your marketing stream,
yep.
and you need to set goals for that.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're setting those goals for judging success of that event,
Yes.
one of those goals can be venue. And when we talk venue, venue can be virtual, venue can be in person, venue can be hybrid,
Mm-hmm.
which is a combination of the two. You can use that to determine whether your event is successful. So we feel like the swing is really more in the bang for the investment, quote unquote.
Yep.
Because as we know as marketers, right? Again, it's a rock in the stream. It's part of this client journey. If you're trying to measure ROI, you're really dependent on somebody else taking an action
Yep.
to determine, well, I spent X, I made Y, but maybe they're not ready to invest with you yet. Maybe this is an opportunity where it's a client who maybe has some funds someplace else and they need to get to know you better.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a goal? And are you achieving the goal with that event? So that's more of an ROM than, because again, like I said, we hear this, right? I don't like the ROI of events, but you know, chicken's chicken, right? And it's going to cost a certain amount, and a venue rental is going to be a certain amount.
Yep.
So instead of trying to measure success that way, our model is return on the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I
Lauren,
go ahead.
I'd love to jump in there as well. You had asked about the trends, and we actually prefer to stay away from the trends, which is actually what, I don't want to say got us in trouble, you know, for the decades prior to us, you know, implementing strategic events. But for those decades, the natural tendency, at least that I experienced, because FinServe is really all I know, is we were very trend driven. This advisor did that. Oh, I want to do that. Or my coach
Shiny
said that, you
object.
know, yes. And so we like to steer away from the trends because it may not be a great fit for that
Yep.
advisory practice, or the wholesalers, you know, doing an event for the advisor, or the broker dealer doing a team building for their advisors. It really boils down to the business goals.
Mm-hmm.
What are the business goals? Are you trying to deepen relationships with female clients? Are you trying to do generational planning campaigns? What are your goals?
Mm-hmm.
And create the event goals based on that. And the attendee, you know, the ideal attendee, who are they based on the goals? Then you build what type of event
Yep.
is best for that group. Just like in the example from Northern California that I had mentioned, is they wanted to do a large client appreciation event because they had seen other advisors do that. But when you peel back the curtain and look at that specific practice, it
Yep.
wasn't a good fit. It was a trend, but it wasn't a good fit for them. What
Mm-hmm.
was a good fit for them is what the attendee wanted. And
Yep.
that was intimate, their local area. They didn't want to fly, you know, from Northern California to Southern California. So that's really what we look at.
Yep.
Do the ideal attendees, are they are they not in your geographic area? If so, a virtual event would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Do they want small? Do they want large? Do they want after work? Do they want social? Do they want education? That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, it's so well said. And I think that's really easy to forget because like we talked about earlier, it's easy to just do that check in the box. There's a firm
Yes.
that we've worked with, and this was pre-COVID, but I think the event is a good example. So they're in San Diego, they target biotech executives. They had an exclusive event, no sales, and it was just other biotech executives, all with similar sort of job, just titles or descriptions. And the whole point of it was just to socialize, network. It was a sort of happy hour event, but it hit those buckets, right? Like knowing your target market, adding value. And it was at least mentioned earlier that it's really got to be about them and not about you, right? And so all of those things just it helps to be that it helps to differentiate you in the market. But I think you just want to make sure, as you all have pointed out, that the differentiation is really coming from you defining what that is first before you just going out and doing something. So,
Exactly.
You know, and events can be used for the different targets that you want to deepen those relationships with. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an advisor-client relationship. It could be
yep,
a wholesaler insurance company
so true.
there with advisors, or broker dealers with their advisors. It can be team building. It can be all of that. And it can also be
So good.
centers of influence. So
Hmm.
if you want to develop those relationships with your COIs, if they're estate planning attorneys or CPAs or whatever they might be, where you share the same client, then
Hmm.
do lunch and learns, offer CE credits, utilize your wholesalers for content.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be, you know, a Valentine's Day event, a holiday event, an education event. You can mix and match, but again, it comes down to what are your business goals and how do you tie those into events?
Yes. Okay, so I just want to be mindful of time as we're kind of wrapping things up here, but I would love for you all to share a little bit about more of this consultancy aspect that you all offer, because I think sometimes when you think event planning, you're like, holy smokes, like, the all the communication ramp up, the event itself, boots on ground, being there if it's a physical event, so on and so forth, all the posts. What is this consultancy piece that you all offer? And can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that works?
Sure. So we recognize that what we're talking about is a little different.
Mhm.
When we say event planning, there's a certain picture that comes to people's heads. And
Right.
while we both have a lot of experience, and it would be a very separate, different webinar if we wanted to talk war stories of what happens at events.
Yes.
And we know that there's a lot of really good people in the FinServe ecosystem who are phenomenal event planners. So what we're doing with event advisors is we're actually here to help support those people and maybe help support the people who either don't have somebody or they have that person who's
Mhm.
HR and admin and the event planner and making sure that the plants are watered and all of those things. By bringing our decades of event experience, both in financial services and outside of financial services, to help people be successful.
Yes.
It's this idea of, we call it collaborative coaching.
Mm.
It's we can do whatever you need us to do. If we need to be researching venues, if we need to be spending some time learning about your ideal client,
Mm.
if it's coaching your team because they kind of have it going on, but they're not quite in the strategic mindset, and you
Yep.
want to make sure that you're maximizing
Work
that
the room.
ROM.
Yep. Yep.
That's sort of our sweet spot.
Mhm.
We have spent a lot of time taking the information that we have gathered over the years.
Mhm.
Um, and for example, we've put together an emergency kit checklist.
Yes.
Everyone should have an emergency kit when you do an event. Just sort of, that's a little sidebar. We can talk, if you don't call us, we'll talk about that. But we've created this checklist that actually has live links, and you just go in and click on the links, and it's everything from a first aid kit
Mhm.
to HDMI cables to reading glasses. And most of that stuff is in there because we found we needed it somewhere along the way.
Yes.
So
There's
we're
a
here to
story.
sort of like help people not step in the potholes that we've already stepped in.
I get it. Oh my goodness. We'll make sure to include that emergency kit as well for folks.
Thank
Any
you.
shout outs, if you could pick one thing from that emergency kit, do not forget at home, what would it be?
Sharpie.
Oh,
I'm sure. I mean, there's so many different choices. Sharpie is a great one. Rubber band is a great one. Duct tape. They're all
Yeah.
great.
Well, and things like duct tape, for example, like you can use it for so many different things.
yes.
Not only is your banner falling off the wall, but like you have a black tablecloth and it came back from the dry cleaner and it's got lint all over it. Take that duct tape, turn it inside out. It's a lint cleaner.
Yeah. So true. I know. You need to tuck that tablecloth in a little bit more. You can take that duct tape in and just, it's like your sewing machine on site. So
Exactly. Exactly.
oh my goodness. Well, so fun. Thank you both for sharing just your experience, your offering, and just a different way of, I think, looking at events, so appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for
Thanks
having
so
us.
much.